Hello, everyone. I'm Chris McPherson, joined alongside Fran, Duffy, and it's yet another episode of the Journey to the Draft podcast. Jam-packed episode, a lot of news and insights, some breaking news, in fact, that we have to get into as we are just 2 weeks out from the NFL Scouting Combine. Fran, you've been diligently working on your NFL Combine preview pieces. Your quarterback one, which dropped on Monday. Lots of people picked up on it. Lots of buzz from the draft community. We'll have your running back position preview up in just a short time here. We're recording this early Tuesday, just right around lunchtime. So how's the process been for you?
Good. I'm wrapping up skill position players midweek this week, and then hopefully moving into front seven. And these are all guys, underclassmen I just haven't gotten to yet that I haven't watched at all. So, I watched Hakeem Butler, who we talked about last week at the end of the show. Yep. I watched him just this morning. So I've been wrapping those guys up, and like I said, get the front seven, and then hopefully knock the back seven out next week. All
right, we're going to get through the show quickly because, again, we have a lot of stuff to get through here. So our Mr. Relevant, it's an Eagle-centric version with Ben Solak from the Draft Network. Our unofficial visit, it's one of the players we're going to discuss in that segment. So I'll kind of hold out on that one for now.
It's a tease.
Little tease right there, yes. Our pick six are the 6 small school prospects who have us the most intrigued. And, of course, we have your questions in our draft mailbag. But definitely this is an edition of Draft Buzz you don't want to miss. We're going to kick things off now with Tony Pauline from draftanalyst.com.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
As always, here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, we kick things off with Draft Buzz, courtesy of Tony Pauline from draftanalyst.com. Again, you can follow him on Twitter at Tony Pauline. And look, Tony, just before we went on the air here, started recording, we learned, courtesy of Adam Schefter of ESPN, that Jeffery Simmons, who has been mocked to the Eagles in a number of mock drafts, the talented defensive tackle from Mississippi State, has reportedly suffered a torn ACL working out leading up to the combine, or not, I shouldn't say the combine because he wasn't invited to the combine, but for the pre-draft process. Your initial reaction to the news and what it's going to mean for his draft stock, Tony?
Well, yeah, I'm told it's also true. I'm told it happened yesterday during training. Some of the coaches at the Tony Villani facility where he's training confirmed the story to me. And I'm told it's an 8 to 10 month injury. So what does that mean? That means he's going to go from anywhere from what was probably a potential top 15 pick to maybe a bottom 10, at the earliest he'll go bottom 10 picks around 1, probably more in the round 2 area. I mean, not going to go to the combine. Now he's got this injury that he's got to rehab, so he's going to be sitting on the sidelines. With all the firestorm around what's going on with Jeffery Simmons, it's never a good thing, but at least it's something where he'll be out of the spotlight for a while for whatever team selects him. So it's never good to have a knee injury like this. As I said, I'm told it's an 8 to 10 month injury. He's definitely going to drop. Maybe a team takes him late in round 1. Otherwise, you're looking at him somewhere in the top 15 selections of the second frame.
How would you compare this to a year ago, Kentavious Street? Also tore his ACL. He actually did it at a team work, I believe it was with the New York Giants. Are there any comparisons in terms of what we can try to project Simmons' draft stock as a result?
Street's injury was much later in the process.
Yeah.
Street's injury, I believe, was like April, almost a month and a half, 2 months later. And Street was not the same type of prospect that Simmons is. I mean, Street never had an opportunity to go, top first round, never mind potentially top 60. So it's a completely different situation. Said that it happened while the guy was training for the combine, like you said, not the combine, for his pro day workout at Mississippi State. But Street's injury was much later in the process, and Street was not the prospect that Simmons is.
I think it's more similar probably to Sidney Jones, and obviously he tore his Achilles at his pro day, and then obviously fell to the early part of round 2. Tony, the big news Monday in the college football, NFL draft, NFL world was Kyler Murray making it official that he was going to put himself completely 100% into becoming an NFL quarterback. Obviously, this was a necessary first step for him and something that needed to be done before he went out to Indianapolis. He's still going to get grilled, but what are your initial thoughts on the Kyler Murray statement and his decision and where he's at this point? It seems like we're talking about him on a weekly basis.
Yeah, it's major. I mean, and it's only going to help his draft stock. As we spoke about last week, the fear of the unknown or just basically the unknown will kill a player's draft positioning, kill his draft grade. We talked about Laramie Tunsil. and the fact that you had a video that was 3 years old pop up an hour before the draft, which hurt him. You look at Lael Collins. I mean, a guy who was questioned in a murder case was absolutely innocent, but the timing of it basically made Lael Collins fall from what was a potential second-day pick to being undrafted. Now, it's a different situation with Kyler Murray, but if teams are convinced that he is going to stand by this and he's going to approach football 100%, and baseball is a foregone conclusion, that is one question that's already been answered about Kyler Murray. Now you only have to scout him based on his measurables, on his game film, on how he's going to fit in your system, or if you're going to build a system around him. So, it's good that he got it out there. It's only a positive for him, and I think that teams that were considering him are definitely breathing a sigh of relief.
Tony, I don't know if you saw the photo of Ole Miss wide receiver DK Metcalf that went viral on Monday evening, where he just looks like an Adonis. He looks like he should be like in the Mr. Olympia competition.
He looks like a defensive end.
Looks like, yeah, exactly. Just jacked beyond relief. Well, what are your reactions to seeing the photo? Jim Nagy, who's the executive director of the recent Senior Bowl, we've had him here on the podcast. I mean, he even commented that it almost gets to the point where it looks like it's like David Boston-esque. If you remember the wide receiver, former Cardinals wide receiver from years back, who was just so physically rocked up, it made him too stiff to play the position. Any thoughts as to seeing the photo there out there on Twitter?
Kind of reminds me of Fran, the times I've seen him in the gym.
That's right.
I mean, it's insane. I mean, he looks great. He's going to look great on the podium. He looks great at a Mr. Universe contest or on the beach. But it absolutely. I mean, is he want to be turned into a tight end? Because you definitely can't play receiver looking like that. Physically it may be appealing to some people, but he lacks flexibility. He doesn't have the quickness to begin with. There are some serious questions about his game, and now all of a sudden he's going to come in looking like a bodybuilder. Long time ago, when Keyshawn Johnson was drafted, when Bill Parcells took over the New York Jets, Keyshawn Johnson was 225 pounds, and Parcells told Johnson, lose 15 pounds or I'm going to turn you into a tight end. And the reason he said that is because, everybody likes to see these large receivers on film because, they look good winning out for these contested grabs. But when you're in the NFL and you're going up against cornerbacks that are 6'1", that are lightning quick, that are incredibly flexible, you're going to lose out 9 times out of 10. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in 3 weeks between now and the time that he steps onto the podium at the combine. It's definitely not a good thing. It may be a good look, but it's not going to help his draft stock. It's going to hurt his draft stock.
Yeah, Tony, I've been watching all these big receivers, Metcalf, and then even guys like N'Keal Harry, Arizona State, Kelvin Harmon from NC State, Hakeem Butler from Iowa State. I just watched this morning. I'm very interested just to get your thoughts on what you're hearing from teams about these big receivers, because the draft last year wasn't very kind to that group, in terms of all the big oversized wideouts that came out early. A bunch of them went later than expected. Is that kind of what you're hearing with this group? I know Kelvin Harmon has gotten round 1 buzz in mock drafts in the fall. N'Keal Harry, round 1 buzz in mock drafts in the fall. Is that something that kind of carries true, or do you think it might be a little bit later? Will it be something like last year? What are you hearing on those guys, and how do they stack up based off what you've heard so far?
Yeah, I've never had any of those guys graded as round 1 type of players. And we've talked about this before. And, some of those guys that you talked about, the big receivers, weren't even drafted last year. Alan Lazard of Iowa State, Simi Cobbs of Indiana. It's very easy to win out for the contested pass when you're 6'4", 6'5", 225 pounds on the college level. It's easy to do that, to exploit the lesser talent on the college level every Saturday, and again, it makes for great highlight reel films. But when let's go back to what we said about DK Metcalf. All of a sudden now on Sunday, you got to show you have to be able to get separation. Separation is either you're able to beat the guy off the line of scrimmage, you're able to separate through your routes, you're able to separate downfield because of your speed. You can't rely on consistently winning out for the 50-50 balls, because the guys who are going to be defending you are a lot bigger, are a lot more physical, a lot more athletic than the competition you played with against Saturday. And those guys, Allen Lazard, Timmy Cobb, they've not panned out, even though they were signed as priority free agents. So with N'Keal Harry, it's the same thing. People love watching the fact that he gets up, against two defenders and comes away with the pass. That's great on Saturday. It doesn't work on Sunday. Harry, it's going to Anthony Johnson, another guy from Buffalo. It's going to depend on how fast they run. It's not just the 40 time though. It's what their 10 split is, because if you have a good 10 split, that means you're able to get that first step off the line of scrimmage and beat the defender. It's what their shuttle times are, because the shuttle times and the three-cone times will help indicate if the guy has potential to be a good route runner. May have to be coached to be a good route runner. But just because you're a big guy who makes highlight type of real receptions on Saturday doesn't necessarily mean it translates well or translates to an early selection in the NFL draft.
So, Tony, we are actually just 2 weeks out from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis. Fran did an outstanding column listing his top combine snubs at each position. Definitely give that a read. Tony, who are some of your players, your list of players, who you were surprised not to be seen given invites to Indianapolis?
I think the biggest one was Jimmy Moreland of James Madison. Had a good senior year, obviously had a great shrine game, played well at the Senior Bowl. Last day of Senior Bowl practice, basically shut down Hunter Renfrow, who everybody loves. A lot of it has to do with the amount of underclassmen that entered, although there were not a huge number of underclassmen quarterbacks who entered. As far as I'm concerned, he's the number one snub. I thought he fully deserved to be at the combine, working out with the defensive backs, also fielding punts because he's a return specialist. You're going to want to time him in the 40. I think what it adds up to is there's going to be a ton of people at that James Madison Pro Day to watch Jimmy Moreland, and deservedly so, because a small school guy who really stepped it up in the postseason. And the postseason really doesn't weigh all that much on a combine invitation. I think what's happened with a lot of these guys is just the enormous number of underclassmen who've entered the draft have resulted in record number of underclassmen being given invitations to the combine, which has left some deserving seniors out. And the number one guy on my list as far as those deserving seniors is definitely Jimmy Moreland of James Madison.
Tony, we're all content creators, and at this point, over the next couple of weeks, everybody's going to be getting out their top, combine lists. All right, who are the top players at each position leading up to the combine? Your last mock draft before the combine. Who's your big board before the combine? And Daniel Jeremiah released his top 50 list leading into the combine. Made some news because his top 5 players were all defensive linemen. Nick Bosa, number 1. Quinnen Williams from Alabama, number 2. Josh Allen from Kentucky, number 3. Rashawn Gary from Michigan, number 4. And then the aforementioned Jeffery Simmons, number 5. Is that about what you expected? I mean, is that kind of the universal thought process? It's something, obviously, we've talked a lot about, this being the year of the defensive line. But is that something that you would expect, and is that something that you agree with at this point in the process?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you go to my top 10, I think seven of my top 10 are defensive linemen on my board. So it's should be no surprise to anybody, because as I said time and time again, I believe this has the ability to be a historic year on the defensive line. Is Josh Allen a defensive end, or is he an outside linebacker in a 3-4? I think Josh Allen really is a better fit as a 3-4 outside linebacker. And the other question I would have as far as that top 5 is concerned is, where's Cleveland Ferrell? Because Cleveland Ferrell on my board is the number 3 rated player. I think he's terrific. I think he's being underrated in a lot of quarters this year. Leading up to the draft, I think he's a guy that can play defensive end, can stand over tackle. So it's not surprising. I mean, it's just a matter of opinion on a couple of players. Where does Josh Allen play at the next level? And as far as my own personal consumption, where's Cleveland Ferrell?
We talked earlier about Jeffery Simmons, just moments ago about the top 5 selection, and of course his ACL tear. Another player, Tony, who is coming back from an ACL tear is Bryce Love. And if you followed and listened to his Journey to Draft podcast back in September and August when the college football season was kicking off, you guys were talking about Love on a weekly basis and his evaluation. Recently saw a 7-round mock draft, and this is a guy who was a Heisman finalist a year ago, was the front runner at the beginning of the 2018 college football season to win the Heisman Trophy this season, and he's now mocked to go into the 7th round. Tony, is this a situation where people can learn from from Love's predicament and maybe should have gone a year earlier when his stock was much higher, or do you think that he'll have a chance to rebound and get selected higher than the 7th round in this year's draft?
Well, I think he'll get selected higher in the 7th round, but I don't know that it's going to be much higher than the 4th or 5th round because of the fact that he's coming off an ACL injury. You know, he's probably, if he sees any action at all in the 2019 season, it's going to be at the end of the year, and it's going to be likely to be very limited action. The fact is you have an ACL on a running back who relies on his ability to be a multi-cut ball carrier, the ability to stick his foot in the ground and change direction without losing momentum. So that's a concern there. You know, as far as learning as to whether or not he should have entered the draft, Fran and I talked about this, you know, I believe when the announcement was made that Love had the injury. It's a matter of being not just physically ready, but mentally ready. And everything I heard about Bryce Love towards the end of the 2017 season was he loved college, he loved the college scene, he loved the college game, and he wanted to go back and make a run at the Heisman Trophy. It didn't work out for him, but you know, to kind of pull that guy out of that situation, if he wasn't mentally ready for the next level, really could have been doomed from the get-go. So it's unfortunate he had this injury. Hope he rebounds from it. You know, you never really want to get on a kid for going back to school, and I know that Love went back to school for all the right reasons. You just hope for the best for him. He's going to fall in the draft. I think he'll be taken before the 7th round. I think he's more of a 4th, 5th round selection.
Tony, our last question for you. We're going to do our mock draft roundup, and as I mentioned earlier, everybody's trying to get in those last mock drafts before the combine. So Chad Reuter from NFL.com and NFL Media, one of our good friends, put out a 3-round mock draft. You got 3 picks here for the Eagles. He's got the Eagles taking Dexter Lawrence from Clemson, the defensive tackle, in the 1st round at 25th overall, and then the 2 second-round picks, Deebo Samuel, the wide receiver from South Carolina, and then Joe Jackson, the edge rusher from Miami. What are your thoughts on those 3 picks and how they would fit here in Philadelphia?
Yeah, we've talked about Dexter Lawrence before. I don't think he's a good fit for the Eagles system. That's why in my mock draft I had Draymond Jones going to the Eagles. Could the Eagles select him? Yeah, he fits his need. He's a bigger guy. I could see it happen. I just don't think it's a good fit. If Deebo Samuel's there for the Eagles in round 2 with that pick, I think they jump all over him. I don't think he's going to fall that far, especially after his performance at the Senior Bowl. I want to see how fast he runs at the Combine. I did my South Carolina film. He's not a true deep threat. He doesn't have that home run hitting speed, but he's a great route runner. You know, we talked before about the bigger receivers, the N'Keal Harrys. Deebo Samuel is a great route runner that gets separation. He's not the biggest guy, but he finds ways to come free, quickly getting off the line of scrimmage, separating by running great routes, using his hands, which is why I think he's going to be a top 40 choice. Joe Jackson is an interesting pick. I liked him when I watched him from a distance. When I really broke down my film, I think he's more of a 3rd-round type of lineman, a good pass rusher who's got to get stronger. He's a liability against the run, can get stood up at the point of attack. But if you're looking for that one-gap type of pass rusher that the Eagles have had success with, I think Joe Jackson is the guy that you would consider.
Tony Pauline. Again, you can read his work at draftanalyst.com. Follow him on Twitter at Tony Pauline. Tony, thanks once again, as always, for providing the insight in this week's edition of Draft Buzz. Now we're going to transition into our Pick 6 small school prospects who have us the most excited in the 2019 NFL Draft.
Now it's time for Pick 6.
All right, so again, we laid out what the Pick 6 is. Now, I was intrigued by your one identifier here that has to be someone outside the Power 5 conferences. So I was intrigued that, some schools that maybe I wouldn't think of as small schools could be eligible for this.
Yeah, I mean, it's all a matter of opinion and, what works. I think that, look, when we talk about players that come from the MAC, we say, hey, or how are they going to do making that jump to the next level of competition?
Mm-hmm.
We always talk about their competition level. So I think it is worthy of talking. Anybody that's outside the Power 5, if they play in Conference USA or if they play in the Sun Belt, I think it's worth talking about whether or not they can make that jump.
MAC maybe teasing some of the selections coming here.
Maybe.
So Jimmy Moreland isn't on our list here.
No.
He's not on the list
Could
here.
have been on the list. Yep.
Could have been on the list, certainly. But I guess I'll kick things off here. And it's a player we've talked about, Jalen Ferguson from Louisiana Tech. And because, obviously, when you have the all-time FBS record in sacks, you're going to get everyone's attention. And he goes down to his Senior Bowl, and it's intriguing that you have someone like, you look at our last two guests here on the Journey to Draft podcast in our Mr. Relevant series. You have Jim Nagy, who we talked about a short time ago from the recent Senior Bowl, raved about his performance there, down there at in Mobile. And then last week we had Charles Davis, the esteemed Charles Davis from NFL Network, who was anchoring the coverage there all week for NFL Network. Came away, not overly, it was impressed, but not like blown away.
Sure.
So it's intriguing to see what the NFL community is going to think of him moving forward. Is he someone, because of the position he plays, worth a first-round pick, a late first-round pick? Or is it like, okay, he had all this great production in college, but we don't know if that necessarily will translate to the NFL? So maybe he's more of a day two selection. So I'm intrigued to see where he goes. I do like that we had a chance to interview him, and he talked about the work he's doing with Chuck Smith. He works with NFL defensive linemen. He's really about refining the smaller points, the details of his game. So there's a lot to like there. It's going to be interesting to see how he tests at the Combine in a couple of weeks, and to see, is he going to be someone who ends up being a first-round selection when all is said and done.
Yeah, I think that he's an interesting case where and you could talk about this on both sides of the coin. It's not about what you did in college. It's about what you're going to do moving forward.
Yes.
So you could talk about that with guys that are super productive. Will that production carry over? And you could talk about that with guys that weren't productive. So you think about Riley Ridley, the wide receiver from Georgia, or Josh Jacobs, the running back from Alabama. It's not what you necessarily did or didn't do in college. It's about what are you going to do when you get to the NFL. And I think that's the debate with Jalen Ferguson is, look, the guy was extremely productive. With his skill set, will that production carry over? I think that's the question.
I look at the running back position. You look at someone like the Eagles selecting Donnell Pumphrey.
Right, exactly
who
right.
was, again, all-time leader in rushing yards. Hasn't translated to the NFL, but Alvin Kamara, who wasn't utilized as much, it was more of a projection, has been outstanding for the New Orleans Saints.
And, of course, there are examples of guys that don't produce at college that then don't produce in the NFL.
Of course,
so
yes.
you got to find.
Yes.
That's why it's an imperfect science.
And a success story for the Eagles on the other flip of the coin is Derek Barnett.
Right.
Okay, who was the all-time sack artist leader at Tennessee history, breaking Reggie White's record, which we've heard a million times, and he has a very good first year and a half until his second season got short due to injury, but. Again, like you said, there's examples all across the board to support any argument.
All right, so I'm going to move on. I'll go with my first choice as a player that, to me, is just one of the biggest sleepers in the draft. And you haven't read my wide receiver preview yet.
Not yet.
I haven't sent it to you yet.
Exactly.
And he will be my trust the tape option for wide receivers for the Combine. This is Keyshawn Johnson from Fresno State, one of my favorite players from the East-West Shrine game. Was extremely productive. I believe he led the team in receptions each of the last 3 years on campus there with the Bulldogs. When you see Keyshawn Johnson, he's a little bit unassuming. He's 6'1.5". He's 210, 215 pounds. They're saying he's probably going to run in the mid 4.5, so he's not a blazer. I think he plays faster than that on film. I was actually surprised to hear that he was only timed in the mid 4.5s because I think when you see him on film, you see a guy that does have some ability to work vertical. He does have a little bit of snap to him at the top of routes, the ability to create that his own separation. So, I look at Keyshawn Johnson as a guy that honestly, he's got a starting skill set in the NFL. I think he could be maybe a Robert Woods type of player at the next level. I'm a big fan of his skill set. I think it'll translate very well.
All right, we teased the MAC at the beginning of the segment, so I'm going to go with cornerback Sean Bunting from Central Michigan, underclassman, who was a first-team All-MAC selection. Long, athletic, 9 career interceptions, someone who I don't think has been taught a lot so far in the process, who I'm intrigued to see in a couple weeks at the Combine. So
he was one of the first juniors to declare, like very early. It might have been, it might have been first week of December.
Really?
He made it clear because they had a coaching change, and it was very quick. So I watched him right away because I had never heard of him. I said, corner from Central Michigan declared. It was a random Thursday morning. Let me watch him. And I was very impressed. I think he's going to me, I bet he'll be considered a riser coming out of the Combine. Reminded me in some ways of Isaiah Oliver, who was a second-round pick for the Atlanta Falcons. They were the reason why he's the reason why they cut Robert Alford a couple weeks ago. He ended up with the Arizona Cardinals. Sean Bunting is very intriguing. I'm glad that you picked him.
Speaking of watching tape at random times, you still have snow in your car because you obviously haven't left the facility in the last couple of days. So.
Well, yeah, I gotta get to that at some point. All right, my next one. I'm gonna go with a guy who's is not off the radar at all, and that's Devin Singletary, the running back from FAU, who's I think he scored more touchdowns than anybody over the course of his college career, 50-plus touchdowns during his time with the Owls there for Lane Kiffin. He's twitched up. He's gotten comparisons to LaShawn Shady McCoy because of his lateral agility, his ability to make people miss. He was very, very good at that at the college level. Again, getting to the production standpoint. Will that production that he put up at FAU carry over to the NFL level? I think he's got that skill set. I think he's got the ability to be a primary ball carrier for an NFL offense. I love that he's got that juice to be able to break off long runs, but then also that wiggle to be able to make people miss. So you're talking about a guy that can do a lot of different things for an offense. He can be an impact player in the passing game as well. So Devin Singletary, a player that really, really intrigues me.
All right, I'm going to go with a big man for my final selection, and that's Ethan Greenridge from Villanova. Wanted to get a little local connection here. You had a chance to see him at the East-West Shrine game. Played both left and right tackle. Was a preseason FCS All-America selection this past season. I think ended up being a second-team All-CA pick there at Villanova. But, again, someone who I think has intriguing tools to work with, has that versatility. Not going to be a first day, probably not even a second day pick possibly, but wanted to get someone who's a little under the radar from a local standpoint here for my last selection here.
Another guy that I watched back in the fall,
and
I was intrigued by him. A big kid, light feet, he's got a basketball background. I thought he had a pretty good week of practice at the East-West game as well. So Greenidge is certainly a player to keep an eye on. I stuck with that position as well for my last pick, a player that you and I both saw up close and personal at the Senior Bowl, and that's Titus Howard from Alabama.
I knew you
State.
were going to go with it. This is the one I was like, I'm not even going to think of taking this.
To me, he's another guy, like I said that with Singletary, or with Sean Bunting, rather, a player that we're coming out of the combine that people are saying he could be a top 50 pick. And I think when you look at Titus Howard, a guy that has completely revamped his body, arrived on campus at as a 225-pound, 230-pound converted quarterback about to play tight end at Alabama State. New coaching staff comes in after his redshirt year and says, you know what, we see you as an offensive tackle. And he was at 325. I mean, he's added over 100 pounds of muscle, or almost 100 pounds of muscle throughout his career. He carries it very well. Yeah. He's very athletic. He's played right and left tackle in the same game because he's they play for one of those offenses where depending on the play, he's going to be either left tackle or right tackle. It's a very strange scheme, but he's good. Their teams are going to love that versatility. There was that with Jerron Christian last year. There's a big reason why he was a third-round pick for the Washington Redskins. So I think you look at Titus Howard, you're checking a lot of boxes. He's at the worst is going to be a day 2 pick. Like at worst, I'll be shocked if he's there in round 3.
So those are our 6 small school players. We talked about no Jimmy Moreland, no Nasir Adderley.
No Nasir Adderley. I'm surprised that you didn't. I thought you were going to go Nasir Adderley.
I'm not going to pick a Delaware Blue Hen. Come on.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point.
I did think about that.
That's a good point.
Through the process. But I think it's good to just get some different names out there as well. So as we get closer to the NFL scouting combine. So again, pick 6 small school players who have us the most excited outside the Power 5 conferences. Now we'll transition to our Mr. Relevant. This week we bring on Benjamin Solak from the Draft Network.
It's time for Mr. Relevant.
This week's Mr. Relevant on the Journey to Draft podcast. We're happy to have a little Philly flavor here, okay? We want to get, I know we tell fans how it's an NFL draft podcast, which it is, but there's times, Fran, as we work for the Eagles, that's, we got to go deeper into what the Eagles' plans are. And someone who is well-versed in the Eagles actually did a 7-round Eagles-only mock draft, none other than Ben Solak from the Draft Network. You can follow him on Twitter at Benjamin Solak. Works together with the Draft Network, an outstanding analyst for them. And fans in Philly, I think, are already familiar with his work because he does a lot of great stuff for Bleeding Green Nation as well. So, Ben, kind of a spoiler as we get into the first pick of your 7-round Eagles-only mock here. As we learned this morning here, Tuesday morning as we're recording this, that Jeffery Simmons, the talented defensive tackle out of Mississippi State, has a torn ACL. He was your first selection for the Eagles at number 25 and a very popular mock draft selection for the Eagles. So your thoughts on Simmons as a player, and also now that he suffered the injury, how do you think that's going to impact his draft stock a couple months from now when April comes around?
Yeah, just a tremendous hit to the glass and a dang shame for Jeffrey. I mean, it's very tough. Simmons is a guy who went through, had a violent incident when he was a young player at Mississippi State. Wasn't sure if he was going to stay with the program. They keep him on, and he's developed, and the coaches and the staffers all say that he's really done the best that he can to clear up his character and to be sure that he's
a man he's comfortable being, and so you like to see that development. He's on the field, developed wonderfully as a player. There's shades of Fletcher Cox back when he was in Starkville with the way that Simmons plays there in the middle of that defensive line. It's really fun to watch. Top 5 player for me. And he falls to 25 because of some character concerns that'll take him off the board for some teams. And then you go ahead and you have an ACL tear. And it's just devastating because he's already not going to be a combine attendee because of the past, and now he's not going to be healthy for a pro day. So, some teams, it's going to be so tough for GMs and scouts to talk themselves into gambling first round on a player who's got a character red flag and now an injury red flag they aren't able to test it. So it's a really tricky spot for Simmons. On-field product, I mean, we talk about power, length, and the ability to disrupt as an interior defender. Simmons you got to double team him. And if you were to put him next to a guy like Fletcher Cox, where you can't double team both of them, that's kind of the problem that you present there on the interior. So interior defensive line is a strong option for Philadelphia in the first round. It kind of depends on the future of Timmy Jernigan. But the reality is that Simmons, a top 5 player who falls, that kind of screams a Howie Roseman pick. But now I have no idea where to place Simmons. I mean, we don't even know the extent of the tear, when surgery's happening, who's doing it yet. So there's a ton of question marks with this, and you just hate to see it for the kid.
All right, so Ben, if you're taking Simmons out of the equation for the Eagles at 25, you had an interaction with a fan on Twitter, and you were asked what you thought was the biggest need for the Eagles was, and you actually said safety, and you would say that they should go for Nasir Adderley, the safety out of Delaware. Would you plug him there to the Eagles at 25? Would that be kind of the option B for you at this point there?
Yeah, certainly. And man, team needs are a lot easier to do after March. Free agency rolls through. Like picking team needs now is always tricky. So you talk about defensive tackle, whether or not it is. With safety, you look at Rodney McLeod, who's now pretty much on a one-year deal that's been shortened. You look at Malcolm Jenkins, a stellar player who's really been now he's over the edge of 30, and you wonder how much longer he'll continue to be as dominant as he was. And once McLeod went down this past season, the Eagles really struggled for safety depth. Corey Graham was obviously brought back in training camp on the one-year deal, an older player who familiar with Jeff Schwartz, but not much of an impact player back there as far as my watchings go. And then you have a young player like Trey Sullivan in his second year who's still trying to get a foothold in the defense. They need that heir apparent to Rodney McLeod, and they desperately need that safety for big dime packages because it really seemed like they struggled with depth there. Avonte Maddox, is he a free safety? Is he a nickel? They've got to figure that out as well. So Nasir Adderley, Delaware Blue Hens, local guy. This is a corner and safety background over college. So he's a really nice addition to a big dime package in year one. You can be your third safety because you can line him up at a bunch of different spots, and then hopefully you develop him into that starting free safety if and when you move on from McLeod in 2020. So absolutely, I think safety is a big need. You really want to see it addressed early because they need an eventual starter there. And with Adderley, his athleticism and his corner background really fits nicely as a year one player.
Ben, in the second round, you had the Eagles taking left tackle Yanni Cajuste from West Virginia. This is a player that we've talked about in the past as a potential round one option. I know your colleague Joe Marino had mocked him to the Eagles at some point. I know he had been a popular round one mock draft selection over the course of the fall, especially in the second half of the season. What are your thoughts there on Cajuste and how he would fit there in Philadelphia?
Yeah, so I was lucky to get Cajuste fall to me. I ran the 7-round mock on our mock draft simulator at the Draft Network, and Cajuste fell to me in round 2. I wasn't going to question. I was very happy to see it happen. The reality is that we've got a really strong offensive tackle class. I think you've got top 20 talent in Jonah Williams out of Alabama, Cody Ford out of Oklahoma, and Jawan Taylor out of Florida. And then you've probably got top 40 talent in Dalton Reisner out of Kansas State, David Edwards out of Wisconsin, and then Yanni Cajuste out of West Virginia. So a lot of talent right at the top. So you have the potential for guys to fall to Philadelphia at 53, 57, their second-round pick. Cajuste with the West Virginia connection is a great pick for Philadelphia in terms of mock drafts. We know they like to go for Mountaineers. And he's a guy who's got the requisite foot speed. He's got the requisite length. And you have some gaps in his eval because against Big 12 rushers, sometimes you don't see the strength of competition you'd like to for an offensive tackle. And Cajuste has some balance issues. He needs to kind of work on sitting back, letting rushers come to him, being a little bit more patient, which is something that I think you see modeled in Lane Johnson's game. You see modeled in Jason Peters' game. They know how to be patient. Obviously, a tremendous offensive line coaching staff here in Philadelphia. Chung is gone, but you still have Gallant, who's a wonderful coach there. And so I think they bring in Cajuste in as a left tackle heir apparent. If you're not positive Big B is that guy, Cajuste is a great value pick in round 2. You expect him to be the starter if and when Jason Peters retires, if that's 2019 or 2020.
Ben, you stay along the lines of scrimmage with your second-round pick for the Eagles, going with Christian Miller out of Alabama, and you noted how injuries have plagued his career and, in fact, had kept him out of us seeing him at the Senior Bowl back in Mobile a few weeks ago.
Yeah, and it's tricky. I like to stay on the trenches. I think edge makes a lot of sense for Philadelphia, depending on the future. Of course, Brandon Graham and Chris Long are both currently question marks. Hey, we saw Philadelphia go Josh Sweat in the 4th round last year out of Florida State. Injury-prone edge rusher, was never really able to fully practice at Florida State because of his injuries. But take the gamble on the guy, and if he hit, well, you just got great value at a hugely important position on your defense. Christian Miller's a pick in the same mold. Hamstring issues, some knee issues over his time at Alabama. But the dude can run under a table like you just can't teach. I mean, the flexibility when he's on is electric, and his ability to take a corner accordingly really translates into the wide 9 system. So 57 is obviously a bit more expensive than the round 4 investment on Josh Sweat, but you're going to want to get too deep with young players on that defensive line. You poured a lot of money into Fletcher Cox. You might anticipate pouring a lot of money to Derek Barnett. And Michael Bennett is not super cheap either. And so you've got a lot of money already in that defensive line. You need to cycle in young rookie bodies. Christian Miller does have starting potential, especially in the Jim Schwartz alignment, if and when he's healthy. You have Sweat, you have Miller. If one of those two hits, you did good.
Ben, let's fast forward now to the 4th round. You take a player that I'm pretty intrigued by, and he was one of my favorite players going down to the East-West Shrine game in St. Petersburg, Florida. That's Colorado safety Evan Worthington. Talk about how you feel he would fit early on here in Philadelphia and then what he could be long-term as well.
Yeah, so when I talked about safeties in this year Adderley, I said, hey, maybe you don't need the guy to start in year 1. You still have McLeod, but year 2 is when you're looking for the start. And that's what Evan Worthington needs. This is a player with really only 2 seasons of Power 5 play, had a year suspension at Colorado for a violation of team rules. Don't really know what that was. And you can see that his tape is very up and down. He has 1 rep where he takes tremendous angles, great range, incredible ball skills, great pick. And then, a half later, it's the same team, and he just completely blows an angle and gives up a big play. And you're just watching the tape wondering, man, like, what do I have here? How do I value this? Inconsistency at safety, especially that position, is so tricky to put on a board. Worthington's got great measurables if you like him as a free safety, and I think he has the range to play there. He's over 6 foot. He's got 32-inch arms. He's over 200 pounds, but he can fly. I really think he can move, and we'll see a little bit of that at the combine, exactly what his 40-yard dash time is. And so if this is a guy you like as a free safety developmental piece, especially with his size, he can be a combo guy for you. He can play deep and he can play up. That's really great value for the 4th round. You have to be able to coach out the inconsistencies. You have to get his eyes a little better, get his feet tethered to his mind a little bit better. So he needs time. As a round 4 pick, I'm absolutely there for it. But earlier, I'd start to get worried.
Now, Ben, a player we're not going to see at the Combine, Devine Ozigbo from Nebraska, the running back, is your 5th-round selection for the Eagles. He was one of Fran's top Combine snubs. I liked your note about the positional value, and it's something that I think is going to be interesting to see with the Eagles in the free agency and draft process is how will they value that running back position, because quite honestly, it could be overhauled more than any other position on this entire roster come 2019.
Yeah, we have to ask the question, because I don't know about you guys, I get this a lot. Well, the Eagles don't want to be running back by committee. They need to draft a heavy touch guy. I'm not sure that they don't want to be running back by committee. Firstly, you're going to have to take touches away from a Corey Clement and potentially Darren Sproles if he returns, if you want to move away from committee. And I don't think those players have warranted losing touches. So you start there. And then number 2, you look at the history with Deuce Staley, the running backs coach, the history of Doug Peterson, even as an offensive coordinator in Kansas City. They like to get multiple running backs touching the football. That's how they've done it. And so I don't think a committee is an inherently bad thing. I don't think it means your running backs are weak. I think it means you have guys who have specific skill sets and you want to get them involved in the offense. So I don't anticipate them drafting a guy with the intention of giving him 20-plus touches. Devine Ozigbo, the strong between the tackles runner, great zone vision, really spry for 220 pounds, another Shrine Game guy who, in my opinion, stood out. Again, a big combine snub, I agree. So I think he's a great 12, 15 touch guy. I think he's a great primary ball carrier. Has a little bit of passing game experience, but with Sproles and Corey, you don't really need that as much. You don't need to find that. So Ozigbo in the 5th, to me, this is a guy who, depending on how he tests, will only have pro day numbers for him. Could potentially slide into a day 2 grade for me. I really like this tape. So I think we see it by committee, and Ozigbo is the sort of piece Philadelphia could target if they just want an early down ball carrier sort of type.
And then lastly, you mentioned Ryan Connolly as your final pick for the Eagles, a linebacker from Wisconsin. There are a few of those guys in this class. Andrew Van Ginkel, TJ Edwards as well from the Badgers. Tell us what you like about Ryan Connolly.
Yeah, picking linebacker in this draft is tricky because it's a weak class, and so you got to find depth where you can. The thing I like about Connolly is his anticipation and his film study, I think, are really strong. And so when you see him lined up as a Sam, as a strong side backer, sometimes he's up on the edge for the Badgers, you can see when he's dialed in, he'll beat blockers to their spots. He'll beat the fullback to the gap. He'll beat running backs outside. He's constantly turning plays back into help. He's constantly winning the leverage point, working as a squeeze player, and getting plays back into the teeth of his defense. That does not show up in the box score, but that's really, really strong tape. Now, when he doesn't anticipate it, we've got problems. He's a little bit of a thinner, more wiry, a longer linebacker, so he struggles to take on contact. He needs to learn how to play and stay tough in a gap, stay physically disciplined, even though he's a bit undersized and he didn't see the play coming. So he will get played out of position at times. You do have to work on adding some mass to him would be helpful. He kind of does fit into that Camus Hill mold of a player in terms of his length and his size and some of his recognition issues. But in the 6th round, you're taking what you can get. I think he's absolutely rosterable. I think he's a special teams guy, so you can for sure have him on the team in 2019. And you're continuing to try to develop that second linebacker, that third linebacker. You're not playing base that much anymore, so it's okay to go a little bit later on those guys and just try to get a rotation in.
Ben, we're 2 weeks away from the NFL Scouting Combine. We're talking about some of the prospects we're looking forward to seeing there in Indianapolis. Who would you say, and you did a post on this on the Draft Network, definitely worth checking out, who are some of your underrated prospects, players who are not getting enough love leading into the Combine?
Yeah, certainly. And there were a couple names on there like Chris Lindstrom, the guard, DeAndre Walker, the edge, Hakeem Butler, the wide receiver of Iowa State. I think Butler's a guy who's going to test really well. But to pull some different names, because I was only allowed to bring up some certain names, other names I've already written about too much. Missouri's Emmanuel Hall, this wide receiver. He doesn't yet know exactly what he's doing in terms of building a route and generating separation. Now, very simple offense that he used to play in there at Missouri was a bit injured this year, and we know how that affected Drew Lock. But, man, dude's loose. Dude's just super loose in the hips. I mean, I think he's going to run an incredible free throw, and I think his 10-yard split's going to be fantastic. This is a guy who should have been a Senior Bowl guy, in my opinion, one of the best wide receivers at the Senior Bowl, and then injury kept him out of it. So he's been a little injury-prone. He's a guy on the offensive side of the ball who I expect to test ridiculously well. And then I'm really curious to see what we're going to get out of safety Deontay Thompson out of Alabama, who I think is another round one potential guy for Philadelphia. Now, there are range questions with Thompson. Can he play that deep center field? Can he really fly? A lot of people watch his film and they're not sold on it. I think he's a little bit thin hips and he can't really come up and tackle, and his range isn't that great. I find myself higher on his tape than most. I do think he has true center fielding range. I think he can come in with a good, 4.5 low or high 4.4s, low 4.5 time for a middle of the field safety. That's what I'm looking to see from him, and I think he can hit that. And he needs to if he's going to come in undersized. So those are kind of my two names I'm really excited to watch at the Combine.
Ben, at the Draft Network, you have a lot of great stuff coming up. Some ideas that I think Fran is actually jealous that you guys are presenting in the next couple of weeks leading up to the Combine. Is that correct?
Well, Fran's got the beta test in, so maybe that was a slow consolation prize. But yeah, we're real excited about what we've got going on. I'm sorry that Fran had to suffer through getting it early.
Please, I don't think that's the case whatsoever. The mock draft machine, you kind of touched on it already, though, where fans can line up present their own big board and then draft accordingly. So definitely a lot of great features. It's something that Fran's talked about we would want to do here, but just in terms of the resources and the way that the videos I've seen of you guys teasing, it seems like you guys are going to knock it out of the park. So definitely looking forward to playing with that leading into the NFL Scouting Combine. Ben Solak, again, you can follow him on Twitter at Benjamin Solak. He works for the Draft Network, a tremendous analyst, and you can also check out his work on Bleeding Green Nation as well. So one of the players we talked about, Fran, Evan Worthington from Colorado, the safety, you had a chance to catch up with him at the Shrine game. We're going to get to the interview now in our unofficial visit.
The unofficial visit.
Here now with Colorado safety Evan Worthington. And Evan, for people who haven't watched you play, give us a quick scouting report of what you'll bring to the next level.
I'm a versatile player. I could play almost any position in the back end, safety, nickel, corner, maybe even linebacker, So I just got a lot of things coming with me.
Yeah, that's one thing standing out that, watching your film is you're a guy that wore a lot of hats for that Colorado defense. You were asked to do a lot of different things, and you showed that versatility, that ability to be able to do it. So my question for you is, out of all those hats that you wore, what was your favorite? What was your favorite role in the secondary?
My favorite role has got to be safety. I feel more comfortable back there. I get to do more tackling, and then I still get to cover people.
What's an underrated part of playing in the back end, I will say, in the center field spot that really, fans and media maybe don't think about?
You gotta adjust everybody. Like, safeties are pretty much the quarterback of the defense, so you got to know almost everything on the defense, or pretty much everything.
And then you've overcome a lot of adversity over the course of your career at Colorado. How has that really kind of built you up to where you are now today?
It definitely changed my whole life. Ever since I had my son, it just turned me all the way around. Gotta work for him now.
Yeah. And is there one area of your game that scouts have kind of pointed to and say, we want to see you kind of prove that you can do this over the course of the next couple of months?
Yeah, they want to see my coverage skills get better, so I'm working on that right now while I'm training up in Seattle.
Have you been, the transition now with NFL secondaries, everybody obviously, over the last decade, everyone's playing more sub-package, but you're starting to see more specialized roles with bigger safeties that can cover. Is that something that's kind of in the back of your mind that you want to prove that, hey, at the very least as a rookie, I can come in and kind of fill one of those roles?
Yeah, I could definitely come in and fill that role, I've been doing it at Colorado in the Pac-12 with fast receivers, so I'm definitely ready for that.
And then my last question for you is, who's a receiver or any offensive player that has really stood out to you so far through the first couple of days of practice?
Probably Keyshawn Johnson.
Yep.
He's pretty good.
Why is that?
He's fast. He's got some height to him, and he's made some pretty nice catches that I've seen.
Yeah, I would agree. He's a very talented player. Evan, appreciate the time here this week, and best of luck throughout the course of this week and then through the draft process.
All right, thank you.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans.
All right, time to get into the mailbag. It's a fun time here as we get to your questions. Love the interview you did with Evan Worthington, and a very intriguing note that he brought up as someone who we just talked about in our Pick 6.
Yeah, Keyshawn Johnson being his most impressive player. I think if you watch the video version of the unofficial visit, you will see the grin go on my face as soon as he brings him up, because obviously I'm very, very high on Keyshawn Johnson, and he was a guy who shined every single day at practice. So for him to show up by one of his teams, that's why I love asking that question.
It's a very good question. Yes.
To see who stands out, because they're not players that they're used to, and sometimes those guys take the easy way out. My teammate, this guy, the guy I saw every day. No,
that's why I always preface it with out. You can't say teammate, because almost always it becomes a teammate. Then it's like, all right,
it's always great.
All right, so first, it's actually not a question here. It's actually a comment, and it's Richard on Apple Podcasts. Again, please rate and review wherever you listen to our podcast. Left a 5-star review and gave some love to last week's show, saying it doesn't get any better than having Tony Pauline and Charles Davis as guests. And
I agree.
Two of the best in the business.
Charles Davis,
no question
the man
whatsoever. So, Richard, appreciate the shout. Thank you so much for that. First question here comes from @_MattB2000. And in light of the Jeffery Simmons injury, could he slide down to the Eagles at number 25 after injuring his knee? And I wonder, he's been a popular mock draft selection for the Eagles. It's really been, I went through 15 of them yesterday for mock draft Monday, and it was pretty much either Dexter Lawrence or Jeffery Simmons. They were all defensive players.
Wow. All defense.
All defensive players.
Wow.
Okay. Did I miss one? I mean, I tried to hit all of the big name prospects, NFL.com, ESPN, Draft Network, gave some love to those guys.
That's unbelievable.
All of them had defensive players, but most prominently it was Dexter Lawrence and Jeffery Simmons. So certainly, definitely, I think he's going to slide past the Eagles at 25
so too.
after the injury.
That'd be my guess.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is you wonder. You have Sidney Jones, and certainly he showed promises, and the Eagles are very high on him. But do you want to take a redshirt year on a guy? And this is more of a team philosophical thing where it gets to the best player available and all that. Are you going to want to take a redshirt year on a guy when the window is wide open for you to win now?
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see, especially at a position where you need to infuse the talent level at that position and try to get someone that's going to help you now, because there are so many questions in terms of who's going to come back in 2019 outside of Fletcher Cox. So I'd be intrigued to see them take a guy that won't really give you anything in 2019.
I agree.
Next question comes from @Roadkill823. Says Nasir Adderley has been mocked to the Eagles a lot, as well as Jeffery Simmons. If both players are available, who do you think the Eagles would take? And certainly that changes now because of the Simmons injury.
We also kind of hit on this with your
Ben Solak.
with Ben Solak, with your follow-up on Adderley.
Only because I was just going through his timeline, and someone asked him specifically about the Eagles, and he actually said safety was the top need, and I like Solak's argument for that. I don't know if I would say it's the number one need, but Dave Spadaro, Eagles Insider, actually wrote a good column about his top 3 needs for the Eagles at this point. So, and cornerback was mentioned, but not safety. But I can certainly understand the case if you're looking more down the road. But if Jeffery Simmons were healthy, I would probably say he's probably the guy. I'm just looking at the positional value of the defensive tackle. Although Solak made a very good case as to why the Eagles need to address safety, not just the long-term answer because you want to find someone for Rodney McLeod down the road, but short-term as well because you're going to more sub-packages and you're going to need someone who can fill in, especially since Corey Graham probably won't be back with the Eagles in 2019.
Yeah, I think that's really when you get into it. And you're looking at Nazir Adderley, a guy with cornerback traits, and a player that has played that position coming up through college and then makes the switch over to safety, has been very productive. I think that's an intriguing skill set for any team.
And volunteered. That's the thing.
Right.
You always wonder, why do they make that transition?
Sure.
And it was interesting to find out that he volunteered. He wanted to be around the ball more.
Yep.
So it's good on his part to learn that. Next one comes from, I haven't heard from Jerry the Asman in quite some time on Twitter. Who are some DBs who would fit Joe Douglas's mold of production as well as combine measurables? And are any of you single?
I'm not single.
No, I'm not. Certainly not.
And I know Tony's not. I don't know about Ben though. We'll have to ask. We'll have to bring Benjamin back on.
Exactly. We'll find out.
But as far as the first question, the reason why I thought this was interesting is I think that after that first class, that got talked about as after that first draft with Joe Douglas here, a lot of players. This was Rasul Douglas and Donnell Pumphrey, a lot of guys that were very, very productive in their college careers. But I don't think that that's necessarily the case because I think you look at even like last year, like Avonte Maddox. Yeah, he was productive, but he was also a very good tester at the combine.
Yeah.
And I don't think that they necessarily you're going to go all in on production. I don't know that is. I would say that the sample size might be a little too small before we go all in and say, you know what, that is something that's super, super important for this crew. Maybe it might be. That might be the case. I don't know if I can buy all the way in on that yet.
No, I think not anymore.
Yeah.
I think because maybe they've learned their lessons from. Not to bring up Donnell Pumphrey again, but maybe because of that, it's
potentially,
like, at least don't overvalue it. Certainly, it's part of the equation, but it's not the entire equation whatsoever. But just his original question in terms of defensive backs, are there any of favorites of yours personally who you're looking forward to seeing in Indianapolis in a couple weeks?
The thing is that so many, like the senior class at corner, isn't great. The senior safety class is really good.
Yeah.
And I haven't done a lot of the junior corners yet.
So
I've done Greedy Williams. I did him over the summer. Very intriguing player. I think the skill set is really, really impressive. Just very inconsistent. So I think you're kind of banging on him getting better and kind of living up to his potential more so than where he is right now. We mentioned Sean Bunting earlier. Was a guy that the reason why I was so excited about Sean Bunting was I watched him and I was like, this guy immediately is a top 3 corner in the class for me, like right now. And that was, again, I haven't watched a lot of these other guys that have come out. But, the senior class, you were talking about Michael Jackson, who ended up at the Shrine game. You were talking about DeAndre Baker, who a lot of people thought was a lock round 1 guy. I don't necessarily view him as a lock for the first round, but that's why you're starting to see guys like Lonnie Johnson, who was off the radar.
He was great. I thought at the Senior
Bowl,
now
might get round 1 buzz. Like if he goes and has a great workout. We'll see. It's the cornerback class, especially for the seniors. That's probably one of the weak points, I would say.
All right, our last question comes from @SC Eagles fan. Do the Birds draft a running back? If so, what round, type of player, and any chance that Jay Ajayi comes back? So
I'll let you hit the last part first.
I think there's certainly a chance. I think you got to see where he's at with his rehab. Okay, he suffered the injury early enough that you figure, okay, he should be in good enough position to come back next season. I certainly think there's a chance because, and this goes to something that Spuds wrote in his column, the running back position might just be completely different than what we saw in 2018. And I'll look at. I agree with the sentiment that Ben brought up on the podcast. How is it probably more going to be a committee by running back approach from the Eagles? I do agree with that. I feel like last year, I think you go back to Ajayi Darren Sproles in the season opener against Atlanta this past season. Whereas it looked like Ajayi was working to be the foundation back. He had a great offseason. Everything was in place for him. Sproles was the feature back in that first game.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I just feel like that I think the Eagles probably say to themselves, and this is just my personal thinking here, is they want to have a guy who can be the early down back. They want a guy who has the potential to be a 3-down feature back, but you're not necessarily going to use him in that way, but has the potential to be, and could be your 3rd down change of pace back. I almost would liken it to what the Eagles had going to the Super Bowl in 2017 with LeGarrette Blount, who could be your early down bruiser, your big back, with Jay Ajayi, who has proven to be the workhorse type back and could be used in that role if needed, and you had Corey Clement, who is your change of pace back. Right now, I don't know who you have. You can say Clement, but Clement's coming off a knee injury of his own. And Wendell Smallwood, I'm not quite sure where he fits. Maybe he's more of the change of pace back. I don't think he's, I don't consider him like the early down back. I don't consider him a workhorse back.
Yep.
So I really
and Josh
think,
Allen, of course, as well.
And Josh
Adams, rather.
Josh Adams. And I don't, and I'll be honest, I don't know where Josh, I like what he brought to the table, but he's not, even though he's big, he's not a power runner.
Right, no.
So I feel like the Eagles could address, if you're looking at each of those roles as their own entities, as almost separate positions, I think each of those could be addressed in the upcoming draft and off season and free agency as well.
And I think one thing that we've seen over the course of the last 3 seasons, this run game is so multiple. It's so versatile. They can use these backs in so many different ways. They've got a wide variety of run schemes that they use. And for that reason, because they have so much diversity in the run game with the way that they play up front, that allows you to be able to fit in any kind of running back.
Yep.
So I go back to the initial question, if so, what round, what player? I think that when you're looking at it, you say, okay, like I look at all these backs. I look at Josh Jacobs. I look at Damian Harris. I look at the Darrell Henderson kid from Memphis. I look at Singletary. I look at David Montgomery. I look at Benny Snell. And I could say, yeah, I could see the runs that I'm watching them, and I could say I could see the kinds of runs that would work well for this guy in the Eagles offense. So all of them, I think, are on the table. Mm-hmm. So it ultimately now comes down to the other eliminating factors. Do they clear medical? Do they clear character? And all that stuff. And now it's a matter of, all right, what guy makes the most sense at each draft slot? To me, I look at all these backs, and I said, to me, they're all on the table. And that's not even like a cop-out. I just look at the way that the Eagles play offense. They all have specific skill sets, but they all can be used within the structure of Doug Peterson's offense. And with so many questions in the running back depth chart right now, I think anything's possible.
Certainly. I look at the New England Patriots, who you can say the same thing. It's not like they utilize a feature back, yet they use a first-round pick on Sony Michel this year, who scored the Super Bowl winning touchdown. So I definitely think anything's in play there for the Eagles in terms of where they could use the resources to acquire a running back, just because I think that the entire depth chart there has to be challenged.
Yep.
So that's going to do it for us here. A jam-packed edition of the Journey to Draft podcast. Special thanks to our man, Ray Doyle, on the other side of the glass for helping make this happen. Again, we're just 2 weeks out from the NFL Scouting Combine. Now is the time to subscribe wherever you listen to our podcast. Until next week, for Fran Duffy, I'm Chris McPherson. Have a great Eagles week, everyone.